streets. This is hosted by Van Alen Institute. If this is your first time at a Van Alen event, Van Alen is a nonprofit. It's been around for over 120 years. We're based near the Flatiron District. But today we have the pleasure of partnering with WeWork and being at their South Williamsburg location. So a bravo to everyone who came out today in the rain to explore the future of street protest spaces. This is a flash competition. Van Alen has been hosting competitions for over a century. We also do public programs and research. Our competitions can sometimes span months and over a year. And the idea of a flash competition is to respond to a really timely topic such as street protest and come up with a ton of really cool ideas within a day and then present them to the public. And so we have 5 finalist teams who have been workshopping their ideas here all day long. They're each going to present their ideas in a 5-minute presentation, and then we have an esteemed jury that will be offering their comments and questions, and then we'll also pass around the mic for the audience to ask any questions that they might have. Then the jury is going to deliberate for around 20-30 minutes, and everyone can have a beer while we wait to find out the winner. The winner from today receives a $500 honorarium. And so I also wanted to contextualize this event within this entire week-long series we're doing. So we do a festival in the fall and spring that's thematic. The theme of this festival is called Arteries. And so we're looking at the way people flow through the city, the streetscapes, the waterways, and so what a more fitting topic than street protests. Some of the other things that we're looking at this week include Justin Davidson is doing a discussion at Van Alen on Monday. It's one of the highlights of the week. He'll be in conversation with Randy Cohen in a show called Person, Place, Thing, where the guest divulges a person, a place, and a thing that have influenced their work. So it's a really nice way to get to know a luminary in a totally different way than a normal interview. Justin just released a new book about walking in New York City, which is how it relates to our theme. Also, we're looking at Gowanus as a clogged artery, or unclogging artery, in partnership with Brooklyn Historical Society on Wednesday. And so we'll have people from both the fields of real estate development, grassroots arts, environmental remediation, all in one room talking about where Gowanus has been and where it's going. And then on Thursday, we have a rescheduled portion of part of this evening's event, where originally we had a double-decker bus tour that would be departing for part of the evening. We separated that due to the rain, and so that will still be following a route that looks at gerrymandered boundaries of the state Senate district in Williamsburg. It will be led by artist Daniel Behar, accompanied by 2 performance artists. It should be a really lively evening. So I hope to see everyone all week long. You can find out all this information in the posters that are here and on vanalen.org. So without further ado, I'll introduce our jury. We have our executive director, David Vanderleer, who's leading the jury. And we have John Schettino, who's a designer and fellow at the Design Trust for Public Space. We have Laura Hansen, who is of the Horticultural Society of New York. We have Boris Santos, the Bushwick and Ridgewood organizer of New York City Council District 24. We have Jack Bernadovich of Take Action NYC. We have Lucy Robson of New Yorkers for Parks. And we have Devin Vermeulen, the creative director for Product at WeWork. Also, just to kind of ground this entire event, this is actually a continuation of an effort that some of the people here were involved in earlier this year when a lot of people were taking to the streets. And it was clear that New Yorkers needed more protected and more accessible spaces for protests. And so Van Alen was one of a dozen organizations that are interested in public space in the city that wrote a letter to Mayor de Blasio mapping out instructions and advice and advocating for everyday New Yorkers to have access to protest spaces. And so this event we see as pushing it a bit further. And so the finalist teams today have been using some of the ideas from that letter to de Blasio, as well as a really cool set of data that New Yorkers for Parks has introduced called the Civic Action Tracker. Everyone should go to their website and check it out. It maps out all of the different demonstrations in the city since January. And so it's a great way of seeing how New Yorkers are taking to the streets. So without further ado, I'll take it to the first team.
Thanks to the Van Alen and WeWork for hosting this. So I'm James Martin, and this is Liam Turkle, and the name of our proposal for thesis is smoke signals. So we started by asking ourselves, how can decentralized assembly be an effective form of protest? Because at first thinking, it seems like somehow decentralizing or atomizing protest might actually kind of dilute its power or its meaning, but obviously there's something worth pursuing. So specifically, we continue to ask ourselves how local actions can resonate on a civic scale, okay? And ultimately, how can, in the kind of broader veil of democracy, which requires a majority, ultimately, how can a majority be achieved or maintained while still celebrating diversity? I think that's the really big question. So we sought to answer these questions by proposing what we're calling an adaptable institution for public demonstration. So we're really interested in the idea of institutionality and the kind of resistance that's implicit in the idea of an institution, whether or not you think about it in terms of social engineering or maybe something a little more politically correct. So this is a diagram of our proposal. We're basically proposing 3 interventions that combine to create an adaptable institution for public space, for public demonstration, for free speech. So the first is space, a stage for public action. Think about repurposing blank space, empty lots, parklets, excess green space in neighborhood parks. That's conditioned, the stage. This piece of infrastructure is conditioned through a participatory process. So imagine this being different as it's deployed in different neighborhoods. Secondly, a beacon. So how do you make the local visible on a global scale? Think bat signal, inflatable lightning rod, or smoke signal. You can probably guess which of those we're choosing. And then finally, mythology. So how do you make the ephemeral part of local folklore? So this isn't something that just kind of gets washed away in a sea of other images and other information. Think of a temporary monument that can collect and display the relics of the demonstration. So ultimately, branch libraries will become the long-term caretakers of this archive and curators on the expanding canon of local action. And so the librarians themselves can become curators of free speech.
1 minute.
Okay, I'm going to go quickly. All right, so this is the first intervention of space. This is looking at this distributed network of spaces that are going to be linked, that have some relationship with branch libraries, which are kind of fostering the growth of these spaces. And then this kind of like branded spatial system is really just a CCTV camera that's focused at a space, and that projected envelope becomes something that is determined with the community to create a sort of tailor-made performance space. And then that, as a frame, forms this kind of unified image that, on a larger scale in a centralized place here, the Astor Park Cube is something that's reflected in a live feed of all of these different events, whether it's one organized, decentralized event or multiple different happenings.
Okay, so I'm just going to fly through the next, which is beacon. So making the local visible on a global scale. So think of a neighborhood scale environmental effect with a very kind of physical, sensorial, phenomenological impact. It's a mobile free speech cart with an urn. It creates a smoke signal, colored smoke, coded to each neighborhood.
That's time.
The cart also collects the ephemera from the demonstrations, so this is exposed on an urban scale, the diversity at an urban scale, and that's it.
Excellent, thank you guys. Stay up front because we'll have a few questions and it's nice to do that with you there. Briefly, so we have a sheet in front of us, all jury members, of a series of criteria that we're looking into. It's a long list that we already shortened from a much longer list, but to talk you through those so that you understand a little bit of what we'll be looking into. First of all, are the proposals that we're seeing today feasible, and so can we implement those over the coming years as physical designs? And we'll talk more about it. Will they clearly communicate what is being done around protest in the city? But also, very importantly, is it creating an equitable system for the full series of boroughs around the city? Then for us it's always interesting to see, is it connecting to things that are already out there? So for instance, the letter that we wrote together with several of the people here in the jury, but also other organizations out there. In that letter we identified 7 steps to make protest a more fluid system for the city. So is it connecting, for instance, to that? And then it becomes about the practicality. So will several agencies around the city be able to use this, for instance? And how do they connect to this? That's always a challenging item. And then last but certainly not least, is it also something that is eye-catching? Is it something that people will want to be part of? Is it a way to elevate protests further, both around the city as well as nationally? So those are some things that we'll be looking at today, and knowing that, I would love to see if somebody wants to open up our 5 minutes of Q&A with the first great team. And you can ask them anything, it doesn't need to relate to these criteria, but I just wanted to get those out there. So let's see if anybody first wants to start with some clarifying items that you perhaps didn't get in the proposal.
Yeah, I just have one question about, you kind of identified this triad of kind of goals or principles for the project. And the one that's on the screen right now, myth, at the beginning you kind of referenced that somehow this project, one of those goals is to kind of get it embedded into what you call local folklore. And it's not really clear to me how that happens so far from what I've seen. Can you just talk a little bit about how this project then kind of like lives on in the kind of narrative of the neighborhoods where it takes place?
Sure. I should have illustrated that, but I was kind of rushed a little bit at the end. Basically, the librarians, or the branch libraries, which is already pre-existing social infrastructure that's also civic and that's also related to free speech and the dissemination of information, becomes the caretakers and the curators of the actual ephemera and objects of the demonstration. So whether it's digital ephemera, like tweets and documentation from social media, or whether it's protest signs, which usually after these marches are just kind of left on the ground as trash, or maybe if it's a memorial service or a wake, some other kind of ephemera like candles. So it would be collected in the cart, and the cart remains on site as a kind of temporary monument. And then after a couple days, or maybe a week, it's taken back to the library where it's archived permanently and can be accessed by the community.
Got it, thank you.
Similar clarifying, so on the projected piece, does that come from the cart also? And is the purpose of that to create a physical space, a gathering space, or not
Yeah,
a
that
physical,
would
but
be
a gathering space?
Permanent space. I mean, this is a mobile unit that's really seen as something that's really checked out of a library, whereas this would be the permanent infrastructure that is installed, which includes a camera and that kind of simple setup.
So it's really trying to create a new type of public space that can be occupied in different ways, as opposed to a lot of public space in the city is just relegated to like generic leisure, whereas this might be coded for other types of uses like performance or for
But all of dancing. that is a projection, or that's a physical
It's
seating
both.
area? Okay.
It's both. It's a physical seating area or a kind of stage or platform, but
Yeah,
that
this
is
is a
framed
camera.
by the camera.
Okay.
Is the camera already existing, or it's a new camera that you're hanging?
It's a new camera, but it would be, tag on to existing kind of surveillance infrastructure.
For it?
Just curious, in terms of practicality, have you identified a specific branch where you would further implement and envision this proposal?
We hadn't gotten there. This was specifically looking at the Bushwick Branch Library and looking at, this is a Carnegie Library which has a lot of these sort of a monumental building with these kind of leftover lawn spaces, and this was sort of a way to co-opt onto these sort of leftover monumental spaces that aren't used in the city.
So a couple ways we saw were these kind of leftover spaces with the libraries that were designed with these mini landscapes, and then a lot of the more modern libraries like Sunset Park or Windsor Terrace that are kind of these flat, modern buildings. Like I know the Windsor Terrace Library, they're trying to repurpose their roof for community gardening, so maybe we could somehow utilize those spaces as well.
So with public protests and the events that would be taking place at these public spaces, how flexible is this design for events not taking place at the library? How movable is the projection system or the smoke signal?
I mean, I think it's not. It's
Move
not.
your mic up a little.
It's not. I mean, there's a movable element that can be checked out, and maybe that there's a way that that could be mobile. But then the idea is that an institution can only do so much for demonstration in the city, which at a certain point is there will always be a need for demonstration that does not fit into any kind of institutional infrastructure. So this can be used for what it can be good for, and then beyond that, it's okay.
My question is about coordination with institutions. I think we are seeing libraries take on more different, varied community development type roles. And you were talking about wanting to decentralize spaces for action and think about, okay, so if we're going to harness the power of branch libraries across the 5 boroughs for a single impetus for action, are you proposing that the library becomes the political coordinator?
Well, think about how at the moment for certain types of demonstrations you have to go through the police department to get a permit if you want to have amplified sound or if you want to have more than 20 people. So we're basically just swapping out which institution you're working with, except instead of an institution that's being associated or that's associated with incarceration, it's an institution that's associated with free speech.
Two quick questions. One, the color blocking, that sort of projection map kind of onto each one. Is the idea that that's sort of like a permanent installation in each location and sort of designates a zone?
The color itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the footage you showed it kind of projection mapped out onto the cube at Astor Place or something. Did you guys have another sort of vision for this footage kind of becoming part of it? This kind of group of all of them together, so you can kind of get this amassed.
You mean other places where it might be projected?
Yes.
I don't know. This is the first one we thought of. Maybe like a statue of a guy on a horse.
Yeah, I think we like this because it's just like a weird public piece of art that we all know that I don't know what it means, but this gives it some kind of meaning, and maybe it's a good use of public art.
Great, thank you guys. Let's do a
Thank
big round of applause for this team.
Any audience questions?
Hi, the smoke is neat, but when I think of smoke in a protest, I think of police throwing smoke bombs to break them up. So is there some way that you can sort of flip that around and make that a sort of positive coalescing force instead of a dispersing one?
I think we were consciously evoking that reference and maybe other more insidious uses of smoke. So our smoke is colored, so it's pretty and dynamic, and maybe it's scented. Like think about for the LA riots, for example, because LA is so flat, there's not a lot of elevation. A lot of people didn't even know that the riot was next door when it was happening until they smelled the smoke of buildings burning down. So there's like a visceral reaction. Or in the summer, when you smell a barbecue, you're like, what is that, right? It's like automatically you feel it's summer. So we wanted our beacon to somehow be visceral and not like a kind of intellectual sign, like a bat signal, something you have to interpret. We wanted to be much more emotional because we think that evokes the kind of the intensity of a demonstration.
Excellent, great. Over to the next team.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie. I work at Shop with Sophie. This is Eileen, who works at WXY, and Ralph, who works at Google. And so when we were looking at this prompt and thinking about it, sort of thinking about our own involvement in these protests and marches in the past few months, something that came to mind is the individual's role within a crowd, and how sort of something that the last group picked up. Is that these marches have very diverse groups coming together, maybe with different causes, and but there's this strength in numbers that happens. But within that, we still think that the individual matters, and the individual story matters. And so we came up with a series of nodes that we're calling the civic current, that can be installed or deployed across New York City, where individuals can go and speak to these nodes and sort of have their story reported. And another element of that, I want to go to the next slide, is we took a look at the Civic Action Tracker and that data that we received at actually where the current protests are happening. And it's a very limited part of New York City, right? It's mostly in Manhattan, and some of it is in Brooklyn. But we wanted to come up with an idea of this system of devices and that are beautifully designed, that can be planted across the city so that you can go up to it, and if there's a protest happening in Union Square, it can play live feed from another one of these nodes in Union Square. So I mean, you can watch it on your phone, but this way you could actually be connected and be maybe talking to someone who's there.
So these nodes are kind of very simply audio devices that are two-channel. That can both, record your voice and send it to other ones of these nodes, and transmit. So a very simple telephone. And part of our interest in this design is this kind of low-techness of the project, and that you can approach these nodes and have a conversation with another public space around the city, in a way kind of compressing the public realm, right? You're directly interacting with other spaces in the city through these nodes. And so essentially we see them as kind of adaptable to the user, and simply holding these microphones and recording devices, as well as a light and indicating to the user its activation. And we see, it sits very simply, it's very utilitarian and easily deployed across the city, kind of bolted to the ground and obviously linked to some element of power. And that simple design means that it can exist on the street, it can exist in a public park, it can even exist, in a subway station. So it's kind of flexibility and very low tech kind of aspect of the project is what we see making it become a tool to inspire democratic discourse. So, one of these scenarios would be that you have several of these nodes existing in a park, and perhaps it has been curated that week to prompt you with a question that you then kind of record your personal story and your response. And hopefully from there, people gather, and it inspires a conversation to happen around these nodes. And also, to transmit these conversations and snippets of personal story to other places around the city. These could also be serendipitous encounters where you have sort of a young child that approaches in, here's a kind of conversation or prompt, again, reminding the citizens of the city that there's sort of greater impact and other voices that are trying to be heard across in public spaces. You could be in Queens listening to a protest that's happening in Midtown Manhattan, and so we're kind of directly linking the two spaces through sound, very simply. And again, this idea of tuning into the assembly, right? These could be deployed at spaces that are often used for the beginning of marches, say the UN Plaza, and their kind of messages can be sent and relayed across the city. So the existing conditions, of course, concentrated in Manhattan, and we can see from the civic action tracker kind of where this existed, but how can we kind of allow it so that there's that 15-minute rule of being able to access through public transport directly one of these nodes. And so we see them as being deployed across the city to kind of untapped spaces. And as a result, now the whole city is able to interact in a public discourse as well as talking about their own personal stories and connections. And more than anything, this design is intriguing to us because it becomes a tool that can be curated by different organizations, by the city, by different groups, to just use audio, sound, storytelling as a way to transmit, whether it's political or social messages across the city.
Perfect. 5 minutes and 18 seconds. Very good. We're not going down the whole row again because it's very boring to go from one to one. So what we're going to do is just see who has the first question, and I have a few otherwise also. Boris, it looks like you're ready to go.
I'm ready. I'm actually good. I'm good.
Oh wow!
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about where you envision the audio going. I think there's a clear picture of capturing it, but if you could elaborate a little bit more on kind of where it's going to go once it's recorded.
So it would go to...
So there's we have sort of two trains of thoughts behind that. So the first is that I could, actually three. So the first is that it would play throughout the system of nodes throughout the city. So you can approach one in a moment when you're just sort of in Bryant Park and listen to these stories in a very uncurated, free speech environment.
Like a jukebox or
Yeah.
maybe just go up and...
Yeah. It could be transmitted live, where what we were talking about, if you're not actually present at a protest but you want to know what's going on, that's an element of it. It could turn into a podcast, and so it could actually be curated and you could listen to it during your commute and not actually at one of these nodes. And then we also think that these individual stories are data, and it's really useful. So if it's actually fed to the city government, they can ask a question and have it answered by the people who it impacts, right? And so, we the citizens or the residents of the city, in a very anonymous way, can give them oral feedback.
Who has a question about how it's being spread out over the city? I think Laura, you probably understand where I'm headed with the letter.
I'm sorry?
Think of our letter.
Oh, yes. Well, I like the idea, I like the premise that it's connecting people, because we know that people who live far from the centers of Manhattan in New York City aren't necessarily going to go to a protest there. But I guess it feels a little bit like it's all about projecting that outward, and so I wonder if you could talk about thinking about with the nodes that you're spreading around the city, what is it the same goals? Are you where maybe protests aren't happening quite as much, or the neighborhoods are very, very different?
I think this is where our kind of concept about it being a tool really comes into play. That perhaps for example, that is a big question, and then the focus becomes about the stories of the outer boroughs. The focus becomes around the stories in the outer boroughs, and then we flip the inverse, right? So the protest is happening Midtown Manhattan, that's getting transmitted, but then, the conversations that are happening, in the outer boroughs in response are then being transmitted back, the following week or the next day or at a different hour. And really there's kind of an open-endedness to the possibilities of this tool, and I think that's partly what can make it useful, right, to the city and to different agencies.
Jack, you had one?
My question for you is, how does this differentiate from current infrastructure that's out there for sharing messages and protests like Facebook Live and other web feeds and things that are more mobile instead of a physical structure like the one you're proposing?
So one thing we didn't really tap into but we kind of like about it is that it can become an iconic design. And then if it is in a square, like say Union Square, it becomes recognizable that this is a space that welcomes protest, it welcomes assembly, and it welcomes free speech. And it's a physical addition to that space, and it also then can become localized because it will have this recognizable design element, but we sort of have this idea that maybe it goes in Madison Square Park, and the artist who's doing a sculpture during those 6 months can add to it or paint it or change it in some way that makes it really fit into that space.
Can I follow up to that?
It's also, like, not everybody, while social media is a super popular comment, not everybody has access to it. You can imagine people in the outer boroughs who maybe don't have access to free internet or free Wi-Fi at their local cafe. They could just go up to one of these, click a button, and just listen. It's, no internet required.
I want to add on to you guys. I think the big emphasis on this too is the recording part as well, right? And that it can be stored for everyone's access of it as well. I think that's important.
I think what she just said was really the key thing, and that's about equitability, right? Because when we're talking, there's frequently an assumption that everybody has an iPhone or smartphone, but there's still a huge part of the population, right? And it's people who are disadvantaged, right, who frequently need access to this kind of content the most. So I guess my question is, how do you really amplify on that, right? Is there stuff that you guys haven't told us about that makes this even more available, or helps people to understand that this is even going to be available to them?
I guess this is where kind of
The outreach component of the project?
Sure.
Yeah, so the easily deployable nature of these kinds of these nodes, I think, is what it's going to help with that. It becomes recognizable that it is widely dispersed throughout the city, and it can so easily be dispersed throughout the city. It then, through kind of public education, how do you know how to use any kind of civic tool or kind of opportunity the city provides to you to better your life? It's through engagement, advertising, discussions, signs in the subway that are saying, hey, this is a tool to be part of the civic realm, to have your voice heard, and to have conversations with everyone around you.
I think actually a really other super interesting thing about our proposal is the languages that you'll get from this, because not everybody speaks English. There's a huge diversity of languages like Indian, Spanish, Chinese. You can imagine just, listening to different languages.
We're going to wrap up with 2 short questions. Jack, you had one, and then we go over to Boris.
Well, somebody else could ask a question.
Jump over to your
Okay, cool. So my follow-up question for you was, because you made a note about these could be used as icons for spaces for public activity and discourse and protest. But what about for neighborhoods and locations that don't necessarily want to be those locations, like JFK? There's a huge protest there. These notes could be taken there, but it wouldn't be left as an icon because it's not necessarily a public place in the same realm. How would these be used in those types of situations where it's more of a blanking on the word, but it's not meant to be a public space in the same way. Sorry. Blanking on the word.
Why can't JFK be a public space? I think JFK would be a great public space, especially for people who are coming into the city for the first time to express their enthusiasm for New York or their fears or their anxieties, I think. And that's what the tool does. It makes any place a public space.
That's a much bigger legal question, I think, how we organize space in this country, but yeah.
So I just want to start my question by just directing a general comment to the audience. Being in government and being no one gets more irritated than the red taping of government than me. I put in a lot of proposals for things and just get shut down. So I'm gonna ask a lot of implementation and practicality questions just to let you guys know. So in terms of these nodes, right? They're gonna need maintenance, and whose jurisdictional level would it fall on in terms of agency? Because I feel like what's going on here is like they're going in parks, they're going in MTA structures. So how would you first ideally want to push it out? With what agency and maintenance of the nodes as well?
You can't say the library.
Maybe, I was just going to say the Parks Department.
Well, I think an element of that, it's not a total direct answer to your question, but there's no screen, right? We purposefully designed it so it's kind of gritty, and that you can someone can pee on it, but they can't steal it. I don't know. It's durable and it can survive in New York City. So that doesn't answer the jurisdiction question, but that does answer the sort of idea that it can be deployed anywhere and it can survive here. But yeah, I think originally maybe in a public square or parks would start there, and then maybe, I don't know.
Okay, Laura, one super short
It's really, it's
wrap-up
more
question.
of a comment. I want to go back to your point about internet access, and it's super important. And so I feel like that when you put something like this in neighborhoods where there isn't a lot of free Wi-Fi or accessible Wi-Fi, people are going to want, they'd rather have a phone charger or a free Wi-Fi. And so if that could be built into an option, I think that would make it much more useful in those neighborhoods.
That's a good idea. Let's see, is there any, yes?
Say your name and what you do in your day-to-day life. It's always nice to hear.
Oh, wow, on the spot, okay. I'm Sinead Petrusek. I'm a recent graduate of Theories of Urban Practice at Parsons, and I teach there currently and work at Artist Studio. And I want to bring up a concern, which is that I see this is actually discouraging assembly. I think this is dispersing folks and isolating them and requiring them to be in a specific place in the city when the whole point of protest is to come together in mass, in large, come together en masse and to encourage people to come out. Bodies in the streets, right? Like that's really what this is about. And I fear that this proposal would actually create more fragmentary participation and actually discourage people from going to Union Square and marching for the light of the city. So, if you could respond to that.
I think that's actually probably a question about the prompt itself of this competition, but we hope that what it does is not discourage people from going to the General Assembly space, but you have to think about who can go to those assembly spaces, people who are not working that day, people who are able-bodied, who are going to be able to travel, who don't have children necessarily to take care of, or not children they can't just bring with them. And so this is really to help the rest of the citizens, many of you overlooked people in this city, who are living in the outer boroughs and thinking about how long it sometimes takes to be able to travel across the city. There's a lot of people who can't make it out to those spaces. So this is a way to, give them access to some of the conversations and dialogues around these protests. But also we hope that it inspires other spaces and other realms of activism to exist in the outer boroughs, right? And that you then are inspired by seeing this space where there's literally a microphone standing there waiting to hear from you, right? To hear your story. And so we see it helping different scales of protest more than anything, or different scales of assembly, right? And I think we focus so often on the large women's march, the huge street blockading protests, which are incredible and so, so important. But the everyday, the talking about the difficulties in your life and the reaching out to your representatives and having these conversations with other people, the real ones that change people's minds, the real ones that lead to people voting differently, like those are what we want to have happen everywhere, right? And hopefully this creates kind of a spark, right, that's new.
I would push back on your idea that folks don't organize that in their own community. I would really push back on that, but I hear.
No, it's more sharing.
Very good.
It's not
We're
that-
going to the last question, and your answer is an answer in 30 seconds, and then we jump over to the next team.
My question is really about, I think the nature of protest is meant to be disruptive and unified. And so it very much aligns actually with that, but I don't understand how this is at all disruptive or stands to unify people.
It's not about, like with this, we see this as a tool to help aid and amplify protests by, gathering those stories within the protest. It's not supposed to be like the be-all, end-all of what is a protest and what is an assembly. Of course not. We are really we see this as an addition, something that helps those organizing protests to be able to tease out the individual stories. Think about how interesting it's been to read all the signs, seeing people's individual reasons for standing up, for gathering. It's those little elements that we hope that this tool can help gather, and they in fact just help propagate the movement, help propagate the protests and the disruptive nature of them through just sort of an individualized aspect of it, right? And so really we say aiding and absolutely not replacing the large protest.
Very good. Let's do a big round of applause for the team. And we jump over to team 3.
name's Kamsi. This is Despotoma. Our project is called Not Normal Infrastructure. And what's next? All right. The premise of our project is that, well, we seem to be in a state where protest is becoming the new normal. And this is something that we feel we can't allow to happen. That protest has to remain a kind of departure or an aberration or some kind of unusual occurrence within our world. And, I'm sorry, here's the image. We also saw within the brief, as it was stated, an opportunity to approach the question as though we're creating a new genre of civic infrastructure. But we wanted to qualify that statement and to draw some contrast. A kind of typical infrastructure, we think of the urban systems that live amongst us every day. They facilitate and kind of weave into the fabric of our everyday life. This would be an infrastructure that's different from that in the sense that it would aim to stand apart.
So, if we look at protests, they occur in different kind of places. They occur at JFK, at Union Square, at Fifth Avenue, or Diversity Plaza. And when we took a look at the map, the Civic Action Tracker map, we saw that they do happen in different places, but it's because the place itself matters. They occur to that place because the people wanted to say something in the place, in that place, and to the actors that are embedded in that place.
So this led us to the first kind of critical aspect of our infrastructure, and that is that it must be mobile. It needs to go to where people are that want to have their voices heard. So what we've devised is what we call a flock. And the flock is a kind of family of mobile elements that have performances built into them that allow protests or kind of speech actions, demonstrations to occur. So for example, a flatbed truck could be retrofitted with a screen, or it could be made into a speaker's stage, or it could be turned into bleachers to accommodate people, to allow sight lines within the streetscape. It could be as small as a bicycle, or it could be as large as a school bus. And the core of this idea is that where people want to be heard, it goes to them.
And so we see this flock operating as a scalable system that can take different configurations and can accommodate small gatherings on local issues within the scale of the block, or accumulate to support a larger protest like the ones we saw on Fifth Avenue and Madison Square. And they're both flexible in the way that they reconfigure and in the time frame in which they operate. So the idea is that rather than curating which scale a protest should occur, we propose a system that offers flexibility. So we see how in a large crowd on Fifth Avenue, a speaker, a microphone that allows voices to be heard, or to gather or to organize or can interact with the public.
We also saw a kind of paradox in this situation, especially the map that shows where all of the kind of demonstrations and protests are happening, is that as they occur across space and across time and throughout the 5 boroughs, we worry that what might be happening is kind of dissolution of the collective or kind of fragmenting of the collective. And we all know the size of the collective matters, right? So how do we ensure that the kind of notion of a large collective still remains, even though that collective may be diverse? It's going to be filled with many different voices that might be speaking to different concerns, some which are more personal, some which affect communities, some which are kind of national. And it's important to realize, like, social media is there. It's a fundamental part of organization, dissemination, and just kind of communication around protests today. So our idea is to find a way that our infrastructure could participate online, but also in place.
And also, the nodes connect and share and receive messages from each other, but most importantly, they directly speak with the people, and the people themselves can broadcast their messages. And the idea is that we want to remove the curator of the message and create a platform that allows that message to be heard.
Yeah, And here they are, messages pinging across the city as many different voices are making themselves heard. All right, thank you.
I wonder if we can start with you, because you've been collecting amazing data around the city that actually was referenced in this presentation. Perhaps you can briefly go back to that image and tell us briefly about the project so that everybody can also look into it. And then perhaps you have a question also.
Yeah, so very briefly, at New York Shore Parks, we've been really interested in the fact that public action in our civic spaces, civic action in our public spaces has been increasing. We decided to start tracking it, and so we are probably on a month-by-month basis right now updating this interactive map, which if you are actually on it, not on a static image, will give you information if you hover over each node that's there, and you can also download our data set. It looks like you guys and some of the other teams have been doing some really good work to figure this out. So we're, as an organization at New York Shore Parks, we're interested not just in the amount of people who are acting, but where they're acting, what subject area they're interested in. And I think that you guys hit on something really important, that place does matter. And my question for you is, I think you've come up with a really interesting solution for accommodating different scales of action. But given that so much of what's happening is ad hoc, not permitted officially through the city, and not with any knowledge by any official actors, how do you envision this block of infrastructure becoming accessible to these very grassroots organizations that are operating on very short timescales?
So I think we had that conversation. Like, it looks something like, oh, maybe it's implemented by the city, but it kind of defeats its purpose because this is something from the community that wants to speak their voice. So we understand that paradox, but the idea is that if this is a recommendation to the city to be more involved in making the voices heard, maybe these are elements that are double duty, and they can, on an everyday basis, can offer to the community as sitting areas, as parking space, as small parklets, but can be overseen or being used by communities if they express the need to use it to voice their opinion.
So can you rent them as a community, or somebody is bringing them and administering them?
It's a good question. I think, well, the non-permitting is a bit of a wrinkle, right? But the idea is, like, a lot of protests, you kind of have to permit, right? So that maybe this could be folded into the permitting process. And there could be a procedure to get one. We also saw them having kind of weekend lives where they pressed into action, like here, but also having daily lives where they could have a kind of transformability, so that, for example, some of these could get parked in like city plazas or kind of new DOT plazas and be activation elements, sort of like a food truck might be that. This could be a kind of furniture augmentation. But I do think the question of who owns it's a more loaded question than just how do you sign it out. It's actually, can it be the city's? What happens if someone wants to use this to protest the city's police force, for example? Maybe this mayor would be accommodating, but would the next mayor be so accommodating? So if it is the city, then do you need some sort of committee that acts as a kind of ombudsman that keeps it, I don't know. We don't have answers for this.
And if I can follow up with that, as I think you hit on something really important there, which is that I don't think that everything should be necessarily done under the auspices of the city, and so I think there's real utility in keeping it an independent resource, and that's my comment as a follow-up for you guys to think about.
Okay, what we're going to do is 3 questions from the jury and then 2 from the audience. Otherwise, Stephen is kicking me out of the space later on. So let's see. First, next question for the jury.
Yeah, given that there's such a history of centralized protest, right, and that's kind of one of the big questions in the letter to the mayor and in this project, you're addressing that in the kind of like physical implementation of this. But I'm wondering, is there some kind of a mechanism or a strategy that's built into your project that encourages diffused or dispersed protest? Beyond having these kind of objects that can go to these different places, is there a strategy that's going to encourage or facilitate people to actually even think about having protests someplace other than like going to Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza? Like, what's going to get them to start thinking about doing that?
I actually think one thing that's amazing about this map is that it actually kind of demonstrates that the process you're describing is occurring, right? You know, it matters that that dock is there. That's Eric Garner's neighborhood in Stapleton. It matters probably that these dots are there. I'm not sure what, but it's, wait, is that Corona Park? So I don't know, is it the local Latin community that's coming together? So I think there's a lot of interesting stories lurking in these dots that speak to the kind of more grassroots, time-to-place protest.
So you feel like there's enough momentum there already that it'll kind of occur naturally?
Well, I think that if you force, I don't think we can indicate places where protests should take place. I think it's kind of, at least from my perspective, I've lived in Athens for many years with so many protests there. It doesn't really work like that. You cannot tell people you should gather in this civic space if you want to say something. I think having a centralized civic space that is already loaded only fits into the notion of the protest. And they do occur in other places other than Fifth Avenue or Madison Square because there was a reason for them to do so. So I think, well, yeah.
Let's see what we have next. Anybody on design issues? I have one then. Are those balloons actually part of the project, or is it just an indicator for you guys for the presentation? I kind of like the balloons, I must say.
Yeah. We're kind of literal about it. We also liked that, you know, the balloon could read, you know, from the aerial like a pin in a map. And so because it's about, you know, taking the online and putting it in place, the idea that this kind of thing, which is actually quite low tech, could read like something we're used to seeing on the screen come to life, but also, you know, kind of have its own resonance in real space.
Good. One last question for the jury.
You talked a bit about recording and broadcasting via them. Can you just go into that a little bit more? I think that's the same question I asked last time.
So, well, again, drawing from my own experience, the most valid source of data is other big people on the ground right there. And the idea that people themselves, in the same way that you can add something to your story, you can also broadcast it on the balloon that's close to you, I think is the most direct way for people to share and receive and understand what's happening in their environment. So the idea is that we can remove the curator of whatever message is being broadcasted.
But also, for example, there was a protest in Queens about one issue, and protests, say, I don't know, is this Union Square?
You can't say it's
Let's pretend it's Union Square.
No, this is Columbus Circle.
It's Columbus Circle, so I know there's another protest in Columbus Circle. Imagine that phone is in Queens, and this person can upload the story onto the balloon in Columbus Circle and kind of give them a window into that. They might be talking about different things, but maybe there's a kind of you know, intersectionality in the dialogue that could happen between different places and people that are protesting for different reasons at any given moment.
Very good. Let's see. Any questions from the audience?
Oh, one over
Oh,
here.
sorry, I didn't see the air first. You're hiding.
Hi, I'm Ian from Think Chinatown, a nonprofit that brings citywide resources to Chinatown. So thank you for presenting a beautiful concept. I wanted to touch on the conversation about protests being a decentralized movement, and the concept of a flock does seem to be quite under one centralized thought. Should we go back to the slide where you've got the diagrams of the truck and the bikes? Yeah, that one. I thought you were going to go a different direction with that. About maybe, I was imagining empowering like local community groups to create these sorts of infrastructure for their own purposes, to transform a bicycle, which they might already have, to become a tool for protest, so that they could be deployed on a more local, decentralized level. So I was wondering if you had any more thoughts on how your beautiful scheme could be accessed on a more decentralized level.
I mean, I think maybe you're onto something there.
Hold your mic up a little bit, and now here it's quite difficult to hear.
Something there. You know, maybe if part of this system could be very small, like a little balloon in a box, so that it could be really easily retrofitted, it might get out of some of these thornier questions that might come up if you have to deal with, you know, the city government, for example, and kind of agencies at that scale, at that size. And then, yeah, so maybe these are a lot more improvised and jerry-rigged. I mean, I think that's kind of the spirit we're after.
Very good. One last question. Then I have an anecdote. We were running a competition in DC last year, in which we were looking at what is the future of memorials. And there's somebody sitting here in the audience that probably gets very nervous as soon as we talk about this project, because one of the winning teams was looking at a flock of pink parrots going around DC to tell all types of stories about the history of DC and so on. Believe me, getting a flock of pink parrots over the city is not an easy task. So once I heard flock, I was like, oh my god, there we go. Thank you very much. Over to the next team.
My name is Marina Pedro, and this is Auto Mitchup. These are some ideas that we've been thinking about for a few months now. We were excited that there was an opportunity today to be able to share them with you and get feedback and hear more ideas on a topic that we're so interested in. With public events now instigated largely by social media, designers must harness tools to provide spaces that promote spontaneous, vibrant, and peaceful assemblies. Public space becomes malleable to different densities and locations, using adaptable public pods displaying the latest social media posts on an event directly onto its unfolding surfaces. These responsive forms of signage will remain dependent on physical interactions of individuals in order to refrain from advertising and corporate interventions. This design supports festive and positive atmosphere that help promote causes, like those at the Women's and Gay Pride marches.
We chose Eastern Parkway as a prototype site. As it has a diverse and growing community. The protest pod prototypes are distributed across the city and begin to be activated when public events start to form. As densities begin to influx, the protest pod forms a network amongst its neighbors, and it can span its network all across New York City. So multiple events can inform each other through social media posts that encourage inclusive action and it's a signaling system for people without a phone at the time to access these pods. Its accessibility can be reached via subway entrances as they amplify the interface that's already being implemented on streets and subway platforms. And creating an expandable form of expressive design enhances the roots and the experience of public gatherings. And the form begins to be collapsed and expands as densities gather and starts to stretch out. And in the next slide, the interfaces can interact with social media posts, so you can post your next Twitter about the event that's going to happen or that you're going to or that you're attending, or your latest selfie of you notifying your friends that you're at this new protest, and you're kind of being inclusive and showing the numbers that are
part of a certain event. And this drawing just portrays the emphasis on design that we focused on in this competition, and how design enforces the identity of the city and the inclusive action and the positivity of a protest rather than the negativity.
This is a potential section of how some of these components can work collaboratively together to form and expand and contract and to respond to real-time to changes in program and demand. It shows the interaction of the integration of the subway. We wanted to consider accessibility to these events as a very important key role in how protests are formed. And to conclude, this design supports the festive and positive atmosphere that helped promote these causes, and it heightens the role of good design and protests that respond to these real-time changes.
Great. You're the fastest team with the most elaborate images. Perhaps you can explain briefly, because I don't fully understand what is the physical installation aspect. It just is a way for me to understand it, and then we'll jump into questions.
Sure, absolutely. So these are essentially, it's a series of pods across the city that are publicly accessible, that we used inspiration of mathematical paper folding as a form for self-structure so that it can expand and contract in response to these real-time changes. So if a crowd of people want to assemble, it can accommodate them and help provide safety and organization and support that kind of movement at many different scales.
Who wants to jump in?
So the forms themselves, is this like an AR thing that I'm seeing only through my phone, or is this physically manifesting itself?
It's physically manifesting itself.
And what's it made of?
These are different types of fabric that we are currently in development that can have a different type of interfaces attached into them, so that there is no longer separation between the screen and the shelter, but they can become one and the same.
My question is, who would be overseeing these pods, and how do you make sure they're there to support the demonstrations and not used against the protesters?
Absolutely. So there's, as we know, motion sensor and real-time activation is nothing new. Automatic doors, that kind of thing. So it can respond to people's movements by their physical presence, as well as recognize who is physically there versus someone who is not activated to those remotely away from the protest. It's only available and it's a network to people who are physically there.
Follow up. You said the paper or the fabric would be potentially protecting protesters. How would it be maintained as protection or shield instead of trapping them or anything like that? Because I could just imagine all sorts of alternative.
Absolutely. Well, we
ways.
wanted to address the fact that barriers right now, there's like the metal barricades that get knocked over, can actually, people can get crushed into them, they can provide a danger. So by having them tap into these technologies that are so readily available, like automatic doors and things, that you know that it will expand, and there's no physical contact between the user and these devices.
Just a quick question to follow up on your first question. He asked about management, and my question is just what or who and when do these get triggered?
Mm-hmm. Basically, they are triggered and activated in response to how many people are there at the time. So if 12 people come, maybe it will just form around their small gathering. If 100 people show up, if 1,000 people show up, they can respond to that.
So it's based on crowd size?
Correct.
Okay.
And these would be placed all around the city, or?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, I was just quickly, so I still am having trouble visualizing. What does it look like when no one's using it?
The left image. So it's a collapse pod. So its collapsed state can be placed anywhere, preferably not somewhere high up. So we're picturing this just as my name has slipped my mind, but the interfaces that are implemented on the streets where you can plug in your phone or scroll through, even in the subway. So in the same way, these are sprinkled across the streets, and they're sitting there muted, and you can see them, but they're not intrusive.
So I just have a comment, not a question. But I'm busy just trying to get wacky bike racks with DOT, you know, besides just the regular, you know, curve thing. So I just want to say, in terms of, this is just mind blowing in terms of design and usage of it. So something I can just move, track people's movements and stuff, and just interact with that is just ridiculous.
I'm also very impressed with the intricacy of the design that you proposed, but I want to offer you a note of caution about it, because I think what you've created is a beautiful piece of interactive art, but I have a fear, because I think that one of the most important parts of civic action in public places is visibility of the people who are performing the actions. And I think that there's a very delicate balance you'll need to strike between protecting people, making something that is visually appealing, that is interactive, that also still allows for the actual people, their slogans themselves, to be able to be seen and heard. And so if anything, I'd love you to talk about what you can do to make it a little less special and exciting on its own, so that it can be adaptable to individual events.
Sure. We wanted to create a kind of signaling system. Like there's a very, when you interact with a protest and you're not necessarily, we want to address the issues between the participant and the observer. And so we both wanted to amplify the voices of people who are participating in the event and kind of communicate to the general public, the people who are not necessarily taking part, and maybe inspire them to take part once they see what it is that they're advocating or fighting for. So we hope that through an integration of the rich history between art and protest, that the two ideas can come together through this form.
And also, I really like that you're thinking about taking the street into the subway and so on. It also sounds rather difficult, but I appreciate it, especially this image. Yeah, let's see, more questions.
Actually, off of his about it being part of the subway, what about for protests or demonstrations not on a subway line, deeper in the boroughs or in a different part of the city, and how mobile are these? Are they concrete in a specific space, or can they be attached to a drone and move around the city and collect if it's bigger than anticipated? How flexible are they?
Yeah, I mean, we are hoping that to maximize the flexibility. If you want to.
Yeah, we were anticipating that these were highly flexible. So yes, they can be placed in static situations, but if drones do come into play, they should be lightweight enough, as these composite fabrics are quite thin, so they can be carried around. And they, as we stressed before, they do form a network, so if there is need of more of them, they would appear in those spots, or be activated in those spots.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Yeah, more than anything else that we've looked at, this is very much about kind of a place-based installation, and I don't see anything in here that kind of addresses the idea of how places are connected. Clearly, the fabric is kind of joining across streets or buildings, but is there something in your thinking that helps to connect these things literally across the city and across the boroughs and out to the outer boroughs and places that are less likely today to be kind of focus points for demonstrations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because of its flexibility, I think that it does have the potential to be reaching all across the city. There's no kind of perimeter with which we're working with here. So there's no reason to say that this couldn't be used not in civic areas as well. It could be engaging in more rural areas, as we've seen across the country.
Right. I guess my question is more, how do people in Staten Island know that something is happening in the Bronx and that these things are connected?
Yeah, through the live feed, the Twitter and the internet interfaces that are going to be there. Yeah.
Very good. Let's see if we have some questions from the audience. I think Jessica Lex has a question.
Yeah. Jessica Lax. I lead our competitions work at Alen. Really beautiful designs. I was thinking, and it's something that I've been thinking about with a lot of the teams, but also with your proposal as well as there's so much street furniture already out there. And if we're going to put out something new, to me it would be, the thought is great that it can have this function, but what about the rest of the time that it's out there? How can it serve another purpose? And I'm not sure if you guys have thought about what purpose that might be.
We did anticipate that it would be appropriated in its semi-muted state. So again, a gathering can consist of 2 people, and the form would accommodate those 2 people.
So yes, to answer your question, we are anticipating it being appropriated for all uses, for all types of public gathering, whether it's a celebration or just a simple meeting of people or a massive scale protest.
Any more questions, comments?
Yeah. I had a question about like ownership and how do you get people engaged with these? Like, is there any kind of, I guess it seems like there's a little bit of a disconnect between like people in the community and these things just appear, or how does it actually get like implemented basically?
So these are, they are based in permanent fixtures that are scattered around the city or around wherever these protests are taking place. If they do need to be expanded for whatever reason, that's when the additional parts can be plugged into them to respond to those real-time changes.
Very good. We'll be wrapping up. Thank you very much. Big round of applause. Yeah. Hold it close to your mouth.
Thanks for sticking around for us. We're the primer for civic engagement.
Here, take this one.
We're the primer for civic engagement, and without further ado, why don't you click? We're the primer for civic engagement, and our proposition under the rubric of Engage NYC is that New York City would put out a primer for civic engagement. Guides, manuals, and hacks for conducting public protests have historically emanated from activists and from the public. We are proposing that in acknowledgement of the current political climate, and being a sanctuary city and acknowledging the demographics that it houses, New York City put out a primer that empowers and enables its citizens to conduct a protest. It's not an app, it's a thing. But it's an open source thing. It's of the people, it's for the people. And so it has, and it must necessarily have a digital life whereby it can be modified, changed, added to. And so it will be accessible through other media. It is a primer, it's a 21st century primer, for instance. And so it has an online presence. One of the things the primer has is a compendium of tactics because, as I said earlier, activism has expanded way beyond the domain of bona fide activists. And one of the things we need as society is to learn activism. And so and the city should not be shy and actually sort of step forward and empower the citizens with different modes of protest. And Mate is going to explain more about that.
So for this very same reason, we first kind of compiled did a research and compiled different tactics which exist already out there, we didn't invent them. And then we were trying to kind of just in general associate with them some sort of designs that could be the most necessary for these tactics to appear. And there are some reoccurrences of what would these people need, or these tactics. For each tactic a little bit different, but there was like a lot of repetitive things actually. So then we actually came up with a open source building block, and first we were thinking about like how could we build things that could facilitate certain types of protest, because there is not one protest, there is many and with different focus. How would we, these building blocks could facilitate those different ones and be put together differently? So they should be hackable, they should be, we don't know how they will look like yet. We have just a placeholder for it because they're supposed to be created by the community, and there should be some sort of a hackathon and all of that shape, which the legal quote-unquote block will be open sourced, and city will be providing the basic for that, but then people could do their own designs, and this is how it will facilitate things.
And so addressing, from the sort of body to the city, how New York City begins to spread the capacity for protest. And so one of the things we've identified is pairing transit nodes with protest spaces. And this will be done in partnership. This will be done in partnership with the One NYC Plaza Equity Program, which is currently partnering with the DOT, but also the Department of Parks and Recreation. And our demonstration right now is mostly in the outer boroughs, because we know that spaces in Manhattan are tried, tested, and the focus of protests, but we need to facilitate the outer boroughs to have their own protests as well. And it is a repeated occurrence throughout the 4 boroughs where the transit system extends, that in many subway stations open out into plazas of various sizes, which means that the crowd can directly be taken to the point of protest, and the very space above it is the space of protest. And we understand that there are 2 jurisdictions here that overlap. One is the MTA, and right on top is parks, often, depending on the nature of the plaza. And so we've identified, go back one, in the Bronx here, Westchester Square, Hunts Point, and Pelham Parkway, all of which have huge, beautiful even, and utterly underutilized public spaces right around. It's that, I'm sort of remiss in saying that Westchester Square is underutilized, but the others certainly are, and these all hold great potential to coalesce activism from their communities and turn into spaces that that can empower people. And as you go to the next slide, we have here in Brooklyn, we have Grand Army Plaza, that is by the 2 and 3 train. We have
Chuck Schumer's house.
And also Chuck Schumer's house. And here we have Beverly Road Plaza, which is by the FNG. And we've identified more, we're demonstrating just 2 here, but we've identified more exact spots that can become spaces of protest on a smaller scale. Next one. In Queens, we have Jackson Heights, and we have Flushing Main Street. And so they're not necessarily plazas, they are streets as well, and they're streets in migrant communities and communities that are exactly being targeted by a lot of the causes for protest right now. In Manhattan, we know, and we know the usual suspects, but we can sort of spread to 125th Street and Adam Clayton Plaza and the Astor Place down below. We need to think about this. We acknowledge. We'll get back to you. We'll get back to you. And so, as Mate said, the actual building block requires many more charrettes like this one, and it would be designed and deployed to facilitate.
You need to wrap up soon. Yeah.
Sorry?
You need to wrap up soon.
Yes. Yeah. And once the protest is gone, or between protests, the primer through these objects and through other things leaves behind a sort of memory of the protest, and in time serves to sort of lessen its own need once it fulfills its need as a primer. Yeah, and it leaves a little monument to the protest. Thank you.
Excellent. I couldn't help myself. I was thinking you had the it's not necessarily the primer, but it's the what is it, the protest for dummies? No, it's probably because you chose the yellow cover. Who wants to begin with all of this? Let's start with Lauren. We'll jump over.
So I really like this. My first comment is no to the city doing it. Because for many, many reasons, but one being that your grandchildren wanting to get to use it. But I do think that what I like about it is a lot of these have been about signaling where everything's happening, which I think is a super important idea, and I love the balloons and the smoke and all that. But what I like about this is that it feels a little less passive, and it's providing people tools to really, take on, not just know where everything else is happening, but to actually do it. But my question is around these blocks, and so you had a list in the primer of various amenities, but then this is, or can you explain the connection between the blocks and sort of this list? Are all of those things available?
Which list are you talking about? The next one?
Go right after, keep going forward. This, the hackable building blocks. So what's the connection between, are these available to people, or are they just to
These are
suggestions?
the things that will be made with the blocks.
And
And they are typically recurring objects of protest.
So the building block, the basic, you can see there the dodecahedron or whatever, or that is hexahedron, is just one building block that a larger assembly could be made out of that. And the community will actually make the larger assembly, but also the community will have the possibility to hack the original one building block to their needs. I mean, like if there are some DIY communities and they want to say like, oh, we don't like this shape, let's make it different. But we are not really sure actually yet about the exact shape at all. There are different approaches how to do this. There could be modeled, the basic building block could come out of some parametric modeling. We were thinking about like some sort of human scale or 1/3 of human scale or half, just because of the relationship with the body. But also there is another approach, why not to make some workshops with communities and they would actually invent their own building. Each community will invent one building block and then the city would create set of those building blocks that will be distributed into the space and people can interact with that. I mean, we don't know yet exactly.
So going off of the building block, recommendation more than a question is providing ways to hack normal day-to-day items like a tire or a plunger or whatever to use it as a tool. Because I know other nonprofits and groups have done that for urban interventions, like using a plunger as a parking line or like a bike lane and things like that. But back to my question. If this was overseen by the city, what would be the infrastructure politically within the city to oversee this, making sure it's open and democratic and not used as an authoritarian tool to restrict how people can protest?
It's a primer, it's not a law. And so I think that it's a suggestion that this, or it's various suggestions and knowledge about protest that the city coalesces and puts in one place. I don't see how the city can enact surveillance through this primer because it's a primer that the public has to access. So if the city is telling the public, surveil yourself, the public just need not comply.
Like city would provide support for this, but it wouldn't really have the control over it. That's the main point of this whole thing.
But also there are existing mechanisms like, community boards that have local groups that work with them, and so you actually, in various neighborhoods you have groups that do beautification projects that are not directly the city, but they're proposing them and then working through the participatory budgeting, for example, to get funding. And I know many different small locations, public spaces have been modified significantly through only where the city is the last step to making it happen, but the community is actually, generating the structure and the thinking behind it.
So I really like the community input part of this primer, but can you speak more about that? How exactly is input going to take place, and if so, what if the community decides as a whole, or the majority of the community, to change the usage of the primer from one protest to another? Can you talk about those nuances? Thanks.
Yeah, so like we said, it is a sort of, it's an open source primer. The primer, it's called a primer because it helps start something off.
We are inviting exactly that.
We are leaving it open to say, here is a jumping off point, and the idea is that by modifying the primer and feeding that knowledge back into the primer just helps community knowledge come back and then feed out to more people.
And also happens through workshops that, for example, like as people are doing sign making workshops or workshops on interventions, the same framework that already exists in communities to take these kind of actions is this goes into that and it activates that existing infrastructure so that you propagate this kind of knowledge. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you propagate the knowledge through certain existing models like workshops and local, activist groups.
But the data that the data in total or what the community wants to see will be recorded within the primer. Is that how?
I don't understand what you mean by the
We don't want to record really the data. We just want to. So, for example, this you can use this primer to set up an area where a community can discuss and plan an action in public space, and this will be like. It will be more for the community because collecting data from the community might be dangerous at some point. So we rather provide just the facility for to create ideas that the community will create ideas about like how to make a protest for themselves or how to organize themselves, and then they will take action even using those tools again or something.
And the thing it takes back from the community is an enhancement of these tactics. It does not take back metrics. It does not take back, for instance, how many illegal migrants showed up at a meeting. What it takes back in whoever chooses to enter the open source method and modify the manual or add to it is how they tested a tactic, how it worked out for them, and what might be done differently as advice to others.
So
There's no data gathering.
So the output is the protest, basically.
Yeah.
So even under the current more or less progressive mayor, there will be a lot of skepticism about the authorities handing down a manual as to how to protest the authorities. So what is your plan to overcome that skepticism or to build trust in this thing?
So if you think of, we didn't include precedents, but things like the Healthy NYC Design Guidelines book, or the Plan NYC Transportation things. These are guidelines that have been developed and propagated from agencies, but they're enabling new kinds of engagement in civic space, right? Like the design guidelines for health are looking at ways that private entities can help change the way the city works without having the city need to do it. So I think we can say that these are happening anyway. This is, protest and the sort of engagement in these large public space gatherings are happening. How does the city help the community to engage in a way that is sustainable, that is sort of empowering the new kind of society that is forming anyway, but keeping it in a dialogue with the city?
And it's not ad hoc, in that if the city gives guidelines, particularly of how protest deals with physical space, that they have a certain streamlining of that enactment in space.
One last question for the jury. No? I have actually one question that I should have also asked the team before you. It's always nice to hear what are people's professional backgrounds. What do you do in day-to-day life?
The three of us are affiliated with the Architecture Lobby, which advocates for architects' rights, labor rights, and we work as architects in the city.
Excellent.
Mate?
I'm Mate. I'm an artist working with biotechnologies and with I'm trying to create an alternative research institute which is called Open Source and Space Administration Institute, advocating for open source public space.
Very good.
I don't know what is that here.
Super briefly for the two of you.
Recent graduates.
Aha.
Proud Institute.
Proud Institute.
Excellent. In design? Yeah.
Architecture.
Good. Any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Could you go back a few slides to the, yeah, that one, sorry, that one. Could you just explain, I assume you're all familiar with the indivisible guide. Could you explain how this is different than or better than or complementary to the indivisible guide?
I mean, the Indivisible Guide is sort of looking at how local communities can act through, let's say, like legislative structures and existing lobbying frameworks that they're trying to broaden that out to community access, but we're more focused on the way that the spatial aspects of that would work and how messaging is and community engagement with an issue happens in physical space with bodies, with visible sort of tangible engagement. So like we're proposing ways to alter the spaces to support that more than say like here are the communications networks you would activate, but also we're thinking about getting the community more involved in changing the process by which they do that. So it's not just like call someone who's already in the system, it's try to invent new ways of getting at the system. So it's...
Do you have a question also? Yeah.
Hi, I do appreciate that you had this focus on the outer boroughs and this immigrant dense neighborhoods. Coming from an immigrant dense neighborhood, I do recognize that it's especially these neighborhoods that need a primer, that need this information to figure out how to engage with their government either through protest or through the process of engagement. But there are also the people that don't receive this information, language barriers, but also cultural barriers. Also, they receive information through different channels. So what is your plan? What is your social infrastructure that will allow this information to actually disseminate into these communities that often aren't plugged into these citywide information channels?
Of course, the primer would be translated in different languages according to the community that will be distributed in, but also later on, we would love that the community will start kind of also creating the primer. It will be not only like it will be a little bit more flexible. And also then, again, they will create, we should plan for an infrastructure within this primer and within these objects that will enable that community to create their own way of protest or whatever usage of this thing they would need at the time to express or just cope with certain situations and know how to respond. Like this platform will also generate knowledge for the community, and that generated knowledge will be possible to distribute to another community which across the city, which could be helpful for them too, maybe. But maybe they would like different knowledge, for different situations, I don't know.
Very briefly, to wrap up.
One of the things we envisage with the building blocks is that they would have a recurring signifier that tie them together no matter where the protest is occurring. And so if the protest is occurring in the Bronx versus like Jackson Heights, that the thing itself ties the protests together, and embedded in that through sharing on social media, if we're having a protest here and the props that we have are essentially similar or bear resonance to the props that other communities have elsewhere, that we imagine as being one way of tying protests, disparate protests together. Because you're right in saying even if the primer goes to them, the people may end up getting empowered, but still the zone of sort of interaction is very, very difficult to broaden.
And their basic organization
We're going to
methods,
be wrapping up, guys.
Okay, that's the last sentence. It's a good organizer doesn't just give you a flyer; they walk with you to hand the flyer to two people you know. So I think by having it be an informational object as well as physical ideas, we're saying this is going to encourage or it gets activated by people doing it together and passing it on and using networks that are not just the sort of standard, delivery channels. It's person-to-person operation.
Very good. A big round of applause. First of all, thank you to all the teams. Amazing to see what you all pulled together in a day. I think we're lucky to have had a rainy day, because otherwise you would all be sitting outside and so on. But no, thank you, great work. Also thank you, of course, to the Alen team for getting all this organized, and then a special thank you to the jury. It's always good to have a knowledgeable but also fun jury to work with. And this was actually a nice jury deliberation, a fast one, but yeah, it was definitely a nice conversation. Lucy is going to help me with delivering the jury comments. We'll start with the three teams. We have two teams that we're ranking really high, and we have slightly longer comments there. So I will do those at the end, and I will end with the winner. And Lucy has the three teams that we loved looking at, of course, for the proposals. They did not make it to the final two, but we do have some brief and nice comments for each of you.
Thanks, David. So, in no particular order, we do want to acknowledge the work that all the teams put into this, and just say a couple things that we noticed in comments we had about how to take these ideas a little bit further. No, you said Lucy. I respond to any name that ends with the E sound, so we're fine. But let's see, for Remedium, we thought this was an abstract and beautiful project and a really fascinating piece of public art. We think that there's a potential for you to take the idea of these pods even further. Think about, what can they do more? Can they draw people into an area that they wouldn't normally go to? Could they introduce them to an idea, to a protest that's happening elsewhere? For Civic Current, we really appreciated the accessibility of the design, the fact that it was proposed to be quite low maintenance addition to our urban infrastructure. And we really also were attracted to the idea of individual connections that you were proposing there. Thirdly, to smoke signals, we thought it was a stroke of brilliance to bring in the libraries, to really take advantage of New York City's library systems as spaces that are already expanding the kind of civic work that they do. And we wanted to specifically signal out the projection system that you were looking at, because we thought that had a lot of potential.
Very good, thank you. Then I also, of course, have the audience votes, so I'm keeping this exciting by not immediately jumping to the two winning teams. So on the audience votes, and this, of course, you have to take lightly, because it's depending on who's bringing the most friends to this afternoon. But nevertheless, we like delivering the audience vote. The highest ranking team here was Smoke Signals, followed by, on equal level, Not Normal Infrastructure and the Primer. And then the Urban Conversation Terminal, so that was the second team, followed by Remedium. So interesting to know all of that. So then we go to the last teams. The second place is going to team 5. Where are you guys? There, good. So great work. We were really impressed with your proposal. I think we all loved the primer, and we'd love to start using it in protest settings. The building blocks we were not entirely convinced about yet. There was still quite a bit to do, and the two proposals perhaps weren't, parts of the proposals weren't entirely gelling yet. So we'll focus on the primer for the rest of the comments. So amazing to have something that is so encyclopedic and that you can use moving forward. So very helpful. Of course, there were questions about, okay, what about the authorities handing this primer out? Is that actually perhaps the danger in this tool? So could it be something that the community creates, the community runs, and gives out? Or is there, for instance, a third party that we all have not identified yet, or perhaps it's the library again? We all seem to like the potential of the library. And then of course we're thinking about what elements of this already exist. So some of these elements the city gives out when you're asking for permits and so on. So what does this add? But in general, really interesting proposal, and would love to see you take this further in the coming months in your other work. So congratulations. Then it's clear by now who the winning team is. You're sitting there, I think, on your own at this point, right?
Yes, James had to leave for a family vacation.
Well, congratulations to you. So a few comments there. First of all, it was great to see that you, of course, as many people in the room, but you really worked through the brief and what could you do with that brief. It had so much potential, your project. We all started dreaming about, okay, if we had a truck ourselves, or just simply our bicycles, how could we start using those for protest if your proposal was being rolled out around the city? Of course, we also had questions. So say that the place aspect. It was interesting to see you're looking at historic places of protest around the city, but could you actually use your proposal to also activate new spaces around the city? And how could you do that even more than you were probably already thinking about? Probably the solution there is in those balloons that everybody seemed to love. People like the idea of dropping down a pin on the map, but also very nicely, could these balloons go up even higher so that you could start seeing protests taking place around the city even though you're not in a particular neighborhoods. Of course, there were questions about how easy is this logistically, is this really as flexible as it looks, but those questions of course always come up. People liked that it was nicely connected to the grassroots feel of good protest, and you could enhance it even further in this proposal. And then last but not least, there was a proposal in the jury to just sell this as a kit at the Home Depot, and then you probably also have a sponsor for it. So that everybody could start rolling this out with their community and their organizations. So jury, anything I'm forgetting in these responses? Good. Big applause for the winning team. Make sure to come chat with Stephen. He will tell you about next steps. And then a thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Fantastic to have you here on a rainy day. There's much more happening in the coming days with programs all around the city. So if you haven't picked up one of the pink posters, go ahead and take one of those home. And then we hope to see you at more events. And good luck with all of your exciting projects in design and other fields. Have a wonderful weekend.